Now, I want to share some bad news with you. I hate to say this, but if anybody wants to go, I'm hoping Steve will do this for me. This is our last week in our series, Who Am I in Christ? Oh, thank you so much. Now, if it was sincere, no, okay. So this is our final series because we've got something else that God has given us to speak about here in a few weeks. But let's go back and learn and see what we've learned. Now, this series started way back on May 19th. May 19th. And it went by just like that, didn't it? Here we are in August, almost 2 months, later, 3 months later, and we are finishing up the series. So let's go back to what we learned. When we accepted Jesus, we became a child of God. We became the salt of the earth. Jesus' friend. We can't have a dearer friend than Jesus, can we? How about a citizen of heaven? Do you remember that? We became God's ambassadors, where we had to carry the truth out into this world. We became the light of the world. Remember, I was up here the one week shining my flashlight? We had everybody doing their flashlights because we were designed to shine. Do you remember those words? We were designed to shine. Can you say those? We were designed to shine, to make a difference, to be a light in this dark world. We became ministers of reconciliation. We became justified. And we became an heir of God and co-heirs with Jesus Christ. We were made righteous and we were bought with a price. And this week, as we close out this series, I want us to know that we are never alone. No matter where we go, no matter time of day or night, we are never alone. We always have our Jesus walking beside us, right? He's there for us when we go through the hard times in life, for us to lean on. He's there when we rejoice and have happy times, right? But he's there in our times of sorrow to comfort us. You know, a song comes to mind. I love how he does that. He walks with me and he talks with me, and he tells me I am his own. If you know the words, and the joy we share as we tarry there, none other has ever known. Aren't they precious words? Aren't they beautiful words? See, we are never alone, and knowing those words, hearing those words again, that should bring comfort to our lives, shouldn't it? It should bring this peace to our lives, knowing that, you know what? I'm going to go through a lot of things in the next days or months or years, whatever our time here on earth is left. We're going to go through a lot of things, but we don't walk through those things alone. Our God is with us. See, I think fear overcomes us sometimes. I think we get afraid. And we're only human. We get afraid on things, right? But I'm going to share with you today a story from Mark chapter 4 about a group of people that got afraid. Do you remember the story of Jesus calming the sea? We're going to talk about that today. So if you know it, you already know. I don't have to speak, right? There's so much more that we're going to learn about together today. Let's go to Mark chapter 4, verse 35, that says these words. They are there, I promise. So that day when evening came, he said to his disciples, "Let us go over to the other side." Now we're going to take this verse by verse, and don't worry, there's only 6 verses in this whole thing. So let's go through them slowly. But we're going to see that the first words say, that day. What in the world does that day mean? Well, that day was very much like every other day in the life of Jesus. People wanted to be with him. They wanted to see him in person. They wanted to see the miracles that he was performing. They wanted to just be there with him, right? And there were also some other people there, the religious leaders. And what were they doing there? Trying to tell people, don't listen to what he's saying, right? He's not telling you the truth. And they were so jealous and they hated Jesus. If you remember, they even were trying to kill Jesus. And we know their story. We know what happened. We know that eventually that happened, right? But let's not stop there. We see this very day, crowds of people were swarming Jesus, as always, and they got to the Sea of Galilee. And there were so many people on that shore that there's no way that they could all hear him back there. It'd be like everybody being up here and me standing here and everybody going, I can't hear you back here. If I didn't have this pack on, you couldn't hear me, could you? Oh, yeah. I've worked with teens for a long time, so I've got a very loud voice. As I try to bring it down. So what did Jesus do? He said, I want everybody to hear me. So he said to the disciples, let's get in that boat and push out from the shore a little ways because I want everybody to really hear what I'm saying. And you know, Jesus taught that day. He preached that day. Oh, he taught. I like the word taught. He taught that day, and people were just amazed to hear him. But as the day went on, Jesus was thinking, well, people have to go home. And so he said, oh, let's go back. You know what the religious leaders were doing and saying when he was there? The words that they were saying to him? Mark 3:22 tells us these words. And the teachers of the law who came down from Jerusalem said, he is possessed by Beelzebub, by the prince of demons he is driving out demons. Are you serious? And what did Jesus say to them? He said, how can Satan cast out Satan, right? Common sense stuff. But they weren't speaking common sense. They would do anything they could to discredit him in front of people. But I love how Jesus gives us that response, gave them that response. And it just made those religious leaders angrier and wanted more and more to kill him. So Jesus is walking along he's out in the boat, and night is coming, and he wants the people to go. But here's what he says to the disciples. He doesn't say, okay, let's bring the boat back into shore, and we're going to go out there, we're going to walk among the people and move on to the next town. He doesn't say that. The words he says is, let's go over to the other side. Now, what? He said, I want you to set sail for the other side of the Sea of Galilee. We're like, let me tell you what the Sea of Galilee was like. See, it's 100 miles square. It spans over 100 miles. It is 600 feet below sea level with these huge mountains surrounding it, right? Thousands of feet high. And it's like this big bowl. And in this bowl, these storms would appear out of nowhere. Now, I'm going to try to give you a reference point. So how many of you have ever seen that show, Deadliest Catch? Okay, it's where, it's a great show. I love that show. But it's where these fishermen are up in Alaska going out on the Bering Sea and they're catching crab. And this is like the worst body of water in the entire world because these storms are so violent. And that's what these waves of 30 and 40 feet would come on those boats, and the captain has to be aware of this. He has to warn the guys ahead of time, like, there's this huge wave coming. He tries to turn the boat so the brunt of the wave is not hitting it, but sometimes he's not able to do that. And this huge wave hits them, and these cages that they catch these crabs in are like 800, 900 pounds, but it pushes them around like nothing. And even pushes the guys around. So they have to be careful out there. So that's what this storm was like on the Sea of Galilee. Hurricane force with the waves and the winds just blowing and going crazy. And this boat was filling up with water, and they were afraid that they were going to drown. Now, I was hoping Tommy would be here this morning, because when Tommy sits up here, he likes to mess with me. And I was thinking of having him feel what the spray of water was like. But he's not here, so Steve, if you'd like to move up here, we'll go. Okay. So what happened? Mark 4:36 says this. Leaving the crowd behind, they took him along just as he was in the boat. There were also other boats with him. So not only were the people on shore trying to be with him, but other people got in boats because they wanted to get out there with him on the water, right? They wanted to be as close as they could get. Now, the question that we ask is, why did Jesus tell them to go to the other side of the sea? Just out of the blue. Why did he say, let's set sail for the other side of the Sea of Galilee? See, there was something special he had planned for his disciples that night. And we're going to learn what that is. Verse 37 tells us, a furious squall came up, and the waves broke over the boat so that it was nearly swamped. In other words, it was sinking. And you can imagine what the disciples were, well, we know what they were thinking, right? How many of you have ever been in a major storm? We just had a major storm here a couple days ago. And there's been terrible destruction from the storms, right? I remember seeing down in Route 14 where it hits 15 down there, it washed a bridge out, right? It lifted the road, all kinds of things. But that's the power of storms. We've been in storms before, haven't we? We all do with different storms in different ways. So let's stop and think about that storm for a moment, just for a moment. Jesus wanting to go to the other side of the Sea of Galilee was odd. It was different. He had that reason why he wanted them to go there. But if you really think about it, Jesus was leading the disciples into the storm. Now, you ever think about it that way? Jesus was actually leading the disciples into the storm. We often think like Jesus will help us through the storms. He's going to get us through whatever we're dealing with. But Jesus, in this instance, was leading the disciples into this storm. And you go, why would he do that? Well, I think because he was testing them. I think he was testing to see how they would react when that storm really hit. Would they trust him, or would they try to get out of that situation on their own? Futile, right? What would they be doing? Buckets of water out of there? I think he was trying to see if they would trust him through this hurricane force that was happening. And I think he was also preparing them for when he was not going to be with them, because we know what's going to happen. We know how Jesus was taken and how he was arrested, how he's crucified, right? And I think he was preparing the disciples like, you're going to face storms when I'm not here. How are you going to handle them? You know, we talk about storms a lot, and we know that we all go through storms in different ways in our lives. But it's how we respond to those storms that matters the most. Sometimes we find ourselves in storms because of disobedience to God. Sometimes we find ourselves in the storms because of obedience to God. And that's what happened with the disciples. They did what Jesus told them, and yet they were in this terrible storm. We know that storms are inevitable in our lives, right? We're all going to face storms. In fact, I think maybe some of us might be dealing with storms in our lives right now as we sit here. Maybe people around you don't even know that you're going through it. And I want you to hear these words. You are not alone. Cry out to Jesus. Trust him. He is going to be there for you. He walks every step of the day with you, right? See, I think there's important things that we can learn about ourselves when we hit those storms. And there's important things that we can learn about our God through those storms. Like, how many times do we have a friend come up and tell us that, listen, I'm going through some terrible time. Will you pray with me? And we say, yes, we're going to pray with you. I'm going to pray with you right now. But don't worry, because God's going to help you. But are they just words that we're saying? Or do we apply them to our lives? Because it's easy to say, you know, God's there for you through this storm. But when we hit the storm, do we know? Do we understand that he's there for us? Do we cry out to him like he wants us to? Do we know that the panic and fear that we face is unnecessary because we've seen God take care of us in the past, right? And we see that he is faithful. We know that he is faithful. And we know that he promises to be with us. Remember those words, I will never leave thee nor forsake thee? True words. He will never leave us or forsake us in good times and in bad. And the question is, do we trust him in those times? Okay, so back to our story. The waves are filling this boat. The disciples are afraid that they're going to drown. But think about this. Don't you think that some of those disciples were actually fishermen from that very same sea? And they had to have seen the storms before. Maybe not to this capacity, maybe not so violent as this, but they should have known how to handle the storms, right? Did they trust Jesus before? Do they trust him now in this life-threatening storm? You know, I ask a lot of questions because I want us to know. I want us to understand what God's saying to us today. Here's a question. Were the disciples in that boat alone? Mark 4:38 tells us that. Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion. Wow. He was right there sleeping through the whole thing. So what did the disciples do? The second part of that verse tells us. The disciples woke him and said to him, "Teacher, don't you care if we drown?" Here's another question for you. Ready? And I don't want you to answer it. I want you to just think on this to yourselves. Have you ever felt like those disciples, that you were all alone? Like God was really distant? That you cried out to him and he didn't hear you? Have you ever been there? You ever felt like he didn't really care about what you were going through? Didn't understand why he was not there to make things better for you? Maybe even to the point of saying these words found in Psalm 10:1. Why, Lord, do you stand far off? Why do you hide yourself in times of trouble? Years ago, I was in a very similar situation to that. I didn't feel God's presence. I felt like I was all alone. And I went to this pastor friend of mine and I said, you know, I don't know why he's not answering me, why he's not hearing me. Why is he not near to me when he promises that he would never leave me nor forsake me? And he said these words, and I remember them, and I want to share them. He said, maybe it is you who's been distant from God. Maybe you haven't spent time with him, getting to know him in a deeper way, getting to understand his love for you. Maybe you haven't gone to him with all things instead of choosing to do things on your own. Maybe you don't trust him to be able to help you through the storms you face in life. And he said, God is not being distant from you. It might be you being distant from him. And he said, cry out to him. Let him know what you're going through, the sorrows and the pains and the agony, anxiety that you're dealing with. He already knows what we're dealing with, but he wants to hear it from our lips, right? These were the words that he said to me. So I took his advice, and I cried out to the Lord. And amazingly, not at all. God came and rescued me. See, I'm going to show you something. I'm going to do something. I want to put that into action. So, float. No. Okay. So this cork is each one of us, right? This is us. So we can go and do what we want. We make our own choices. We are with people, we're not with people. Well, sometimes we like to distance ourselves from others, right? And we get so used to being alone. And it gets worse. People ask us to do things and we don't do them. We start building walls, right? We start saying, no, I'm not coming to your house. I don't want to go and have dinner with you. I don't want anything to do. I want to just spend time alone. We get deeper and deeper into that. And what happens? We fall into this kind of like pit, right? That we can't get ourselves out of. There's no way we're going to get out of that alone. And then we take the words like my friend told me. We cry out to God. We say, can you help me through this? And this is God. This is representing God right now, okay? And what does he do? He comes into where we are. He meets us in that loneliness. And he fills in those gaps where we're missing. He helps us to see that we need to cry out to him and lean on him. You know, he promises to help us through every storm, doesn't he? And what's he do? He wraps himself around us, right? That's him. We're in his hands now. And we say, Lord, can you help me through this storm? And he promises to pull us out of that storm, doesn't he? Do you think he's going to do that? Let's see if he can do it. And he's with us, and he pulls us out of that storm. That's what our God does. That's what our God does. Even though we feel weak and trapped, the Lord will provide a way if we trust him. So the disciples were afraid. They wake Jesus up and ask him if he doesn't care about them. And I love what Jesus does next. Verse 39 says this. He got up and he rebuked the winds and said to the waves. Now I know this as peace be still, right? Peace be still. Then the wind died down and it was completely calm. Do you get that? This hurricane force that was pounding on their boat and sinking them, Jesus said 3 words, peace be still, and calmed everything. And I believe that's what he does in our lives when we cry out to him. When we're dealing with things in our life and we cry out and say, Lord, will you help us? And he speaks those 3 words of peace, be still, into our lives. And it changes our lives completely. It brings, as the words say, completely a calmness to our soul, right? It was completely calm. Do you trust Jesus like that? Do you trust him to help you through those storms? Mark 4:40 says these words. He said to his disciples, why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith? And he's saying those words to us too today. Why are you afraid? Don't you trust me? I've proven in the past that I will help you. Why don't you trust me? See, we do face storms. We're going to continue to face storms until we get to heaven. And then it's all gone. It's all over. Peace forevermore, right? On that happy golden shore. Another song just came to me. What a day, glorious day that will be. Fear has no place in our lives if we trust God. And God is calling you and I out right now to a faith that resists fear in our lives. He's calling us out right now to a faith that conquers fear in our lives. I don't want to live with fear in my life. Do you? We don't have to. See, when we have that kind of faith, we can overcome anything that the world throws at us. We can face the storms that come our way, knowing we have the one who calms the storms right there in our boat with us, right? You know, my life verse is Philippians 4:13, and I love that verse because it gives me that calmness and that peace. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. All things. You know, if you were to look up, we talk about fear. If you were to look up in the Bible how many times it says a combination of these words, do not fear or fear not, do not be afraid, you will find them 365 times in the Bible. Now, I'm going to encourage you, go ahead, through the Bible this week. That's your homework. 365 times. Not really. Do not be afraid. I love that. And what did it do for you? Did it bring this calmness over you? And that's what his word does, right? That's what it's meant to do. That's what we're supposed to find in here, the calmness and peace and the drive to carry on, to move forward in our lives. Thank you for that, Karen. I love how God speaks to us in so many ways. And he brings scripture that we've read, maybe even a week ago, brings them back to us, doesn't he? Because the word is alive. So it's important that we do not face fear, and we trust God day by day to help us through whatever we're dealing with. And the last verse I want to share with you is verse 41. It says, they were terrified and asked each other, who is this? Even the winds and the waves obey him. Now, wait a minute. You're going to think, oh, wait a minute. Weren't they? He just asked them if they were afraid. He calmed their fears. He calmed the waters. Why are they terrified now? It's a different sense, right? This terrified, this afraid part of them is reverence or awe in the face of a powerful, intimidating force, a God who can do all things. The disciples realized they were standing in the boat with the one who commands the winds and the wave, the one who is in control of everything. They knew that only God could do these things, and they knew that he was right there with them, like he says, walking beside them, right? They realized that God was with them and they were never alone. And I ask you, what about you? What about you? Are you dealing with some really difficult things in your life right now? Are you trying to get through them on your own but not feeling there's an end in sight? Have you given up trying and wish things would be different but just don't know how to change them? Are you feeling alone? I want to share those words with you that pastor friend of mine shared with me one more time. Maybe it's you who's been distant from God. Maybe you haven't spent time with him getting deeper in your understanding of who he is and how much he loves you. Maybe you haven't gone to him with all things, instead choosing to do things on your own. Maybe you don't trust him to be able to help you through the storms you faced. God is not being distant from you. It might be you are being distant from him. Trust him. Cry out to him. Let him know what you're going through. He is faithful. We just sang that, right? Our God is faithful. Then after you cry out to him, the hardest part of all is waiting patiently. How many have a hard time waiting patiently? Yep. Waiting for something to happen. But God's timing is perfect. His plan is perfect, and he will help us in his time and his way. One day, all the storms of life are going to end. The sea will be peaceful forever. But until then, we can know that we're going to face storms. Life is going to be continued to be difficult, but through it all, we can hold on to this one amazing truth. If you get nothing out of this today, then this. Take this with you. Jesus cares so much for you. He is willing to get in the boat with you. He's willing to die for you, to perish, so that you won't have to. And the answer to the question that the disciples asked him, don't you care about what we're going through? He answers that for us today in the storms that we're dealing with. I love you so much. I'm here for you. You just need to trust me. And let me do what needs to be done. Hebrews 13:5 says these words. Once again, I will never leave thee nor forsake thee. Remember those words.